The Clansman gang trial resumed today after a week-long adjournment. The prosecution began its response to no-case submissions.
The prosecution in the Clansman gang trial may be having a hard time planting their arguments as they share their responses to no-case-to-answer submissions. The proceedings on Monday began with the prosecution insisting on holding alleged leader of the one-don faction of the Clansman gang, Andre Blackman Bryan, on count 20, the murder of an unknown person in St. Catherine. The incident took place at a Popular Hardware in 2018. According to witness testimony, Blackman was displeased that not enough persons were being killed. When asked by fellow accused gangster Ted Prince what should be done, Blackman reportedly replied, "Nyamim food." Blackman's lawyer posited that there was not enough evidence to prove that the man had died. However, on Monday, the prosecution said the body which was left there had to be removed by a man. That fact should indicate that he had indeed died. However, Chief Justice Brian Sykes was not buying the argument. He said that a naked assertion from a witness may not be enough evidence. He says he found it remarkable that a murder could happen on a major thoroughfare with no witnesses or police evidence or even a post-mortem available, all of which would at least prove that the body exists. The prosecution says there were police officers who processed the scene. They admit they did not ask them to testify as the lawmen were no longer in the JCF, an explanation that Sykes rejected. The rest of the responses were met with similar inquiries from the judge. Responses were also provided for Tomrick Taylor, Daniel McKenzie, Kevon Green, Khalifa Williams, Michael Whiteley, and Pete Miller.
The prosecution submitted that the one-don faction of the St. Catherine-based gang has a structure and members with defined roles surrounding a common purpose, that of carrying out criminal activities. The prosecution made submissions in relation to defendants Tomrick Taylor, alias Fancy Ras, Daniel McKenzie, alias Biggs, Kevon Green, the brother of the alleged gang leader Andre Blackman Bryan, and others. The prosecution tried to prove that Taylor was part of the criminal organization based on evidence given by a former gangster turned state witness. They tried submitting an unindicted offense of conspiracy to murder of a man called Dooley. The purported gang leader allegedly gave the order to have Dooley killed. According to the witness, Taylor and other gangsters collected guns and drove to a section of Red Hills Road in St. Andrew to carry out the killing. Justice Sykes asked if the Crown was only relying on this case to prove that Taylor was a member, to which the prosecutor answered yes and no, saying that other evidence exists that puts Taylor in the company of other gangsters. The witness described Taylor as a shooter for the gang. Chief Justice Sykes highlighted that there is a difference between association and membership. With regards to defendant Kevon Green, he was described by the witness as a top-tier member of the gang who took orders from his brother to, quote, get gunshots, end quote. The witness further stated that Green, quote, had talk over all the dons, end quote. But Green's lawyer argued that he's only in court because of his relationship with Bryan. The prosecution
Court resumes on Tuesday at 11 a.m.
Meanwhile, the Clansman gang trial continued today with more responses from the prosecution in trying to uphold their case against selected defendants identified in extortion practices. Chief Justice Brian Sykes asked the prosecutors for more solid evidence that their monies were collected through unwarranted demand.
Technicalities in legislation threatens to foil the prosecution's case in the Clansman gang trial. Continuing their responses to the no-case-to-answer submissions, the prosecution again tried to prove that there was a case against Donovan McKenzie, the childhood best friend of Crown Witness 1. McKenzie allegedly collected extortion money from taxi drivers and vendors in Spanish Town for the gang. Though both witnesses testified that money was collected, Chief Justice Brian Sykes asked if they witnessed the collection. He clarified that there is a difference between an eyewitness testimony and an understanding of a certain happening, as understanding is not supported by law. Dylan McLean, another so-called top man of the gang who allegedly provided security for alleged leader Andre Blackman Bryan, may have to answer to the double murder arson in New Nurseries 2017. The attorney insisted that he was party to a common design to injure persons as part of a criminal organization. Witness testimony also indicates McLean colluded to collect an extortion fee of $1,000 from bus drivers in Spanish Town. Meanwhile, the prosecution has conceded on count 25, which named several defendants, including Blackman and Stephanie Muma Christie, as co-conspirators in the murder of a man named Ice. This is because of the prosecution's inability to prove that Ice was even a person. Other defendants that will no longer be tried under this count are Fabian Johnson, Jaziel Blake, Andre Golding, and Lamar Simpson.
To the courts now, Chief Justice Brian Sykes has indicated his disinterest in accepting evidence relating to a firearm that investigators recovered with the help of an ex-gangster. Poor record-keeping of the chain of custody is informing his decision. The doubt is drawing more attention to the historic gang trial that could become a landmark case in the region.
Alleged Clansman gangster turned Crown witness told the enthralling story of how he recovered a rifle from defendant Royal Taylor under the pretense of repairing it. That was when he handed over the firearm to 2 investigators instead. These same investigators later testified how they entered the firearm into evidence. That evidence is now under threat of being disregarded by Chief Justice Brian Sykes, who took issue with how the chain of custody records were kept. After requesting the rifle be brought into the court, Sykes notes that when the rifle was brought into the Caymanas police station, neither detective sergeant had anything to do with the labeling of the firearm, and there was no record from the station clerk documenting where the gun was left that's consistent with witness testimony. He questions why the prosecution did not have that station clerk testify, as that would provide affirmative evidence. He ended the exchange by saying, "Let me put you out of your misery. The evidence is not good enough." Sykes also chided the prosecution for inadequate evidence in identifying defendant Jason Brown as Citypus. Calling back to recorded phone calls, the prosecution says being positively identified twice by their key witness and a detective proves that he is connected to the gang. Sykes, however, says credibility of the detective alone cannot stand. This same detective says he visited the Horizon Remand Center where Brown was allegedly held, so he could put a face to the voice of the man he heard on the recordings. Justice Sykes says he did not understand the reasoning behind having the detective go there without using technology to capture affirmative evidence. Sykes suggests, though cell site information indicates that a phone number assigned to Citypus made calls in the vicinity of the prison, inmate records could have confirmed his location at a certain time and further proved the detective's claim. Court resumes on Thursday at 11.
The Clansman gang trial is winding down. Chief Justice Brian Sykes is set to hand down his ruling on Monday after the nearly year-long landmark trial. Anticipation looms as the country and the region await the fate of Andre Blackman-Bryan and his co-accused.
In a last-ditch effort to save their case, the prosecution in the Clansman gang trial attempted to use firearm evidence to connect 2 incidents. Through the examination of ballistic evidence, the prosecution said that the alleged recovery of a Sig-Sauer pistol from defendant Tariq James in 2017 is connected to the Fisheries murder earlier that year. However, there was no tangible proof to the evidence that was gathered, as the photos that were taken at the scene were lost. Presiding Judge Brian Sykes lamented the prosecution's insistence on presenting faith-based statements, like expert testimony. Sykes says, "It can't be that you have a homicide in the 21st century and no record. So if the police officer recovers these things, they don't have to record it somewhere? Contemporaneous records. So even if you say the photographic images are lost, computer crash, there is no log to say I received this item." The prosecution tried to compare the Fisheries and Price Right murders to prove evidence gathering, but Sykes said it was like comparing chalk and cheese, as one incident has evidence while the other had none at all. Sykes goes on to explain to the prosecution, "What you are proving, in the case of Tariq James, is illegal possession of firearm. What you must begin to grasp, the way in which the case is constructed, it is dependent on proof of crime in order to prove the existence of the organization. If that is the way the case is constructed, the proof of the underlying crime needs to be complete. As it stands, the evidence does not connect the defendants as members of a criminal organization, but persons accused of various offenses." In response, the prosecution conceded, "We are where we are." The judge is set to deliver his ruling.